Hello, this is Scott Pattison. I'm Executive Director of the National Association of State Budget Officers. And with the recent release of our Fall 2013 Fiscal Survey of States report, I'm pleased to provide this brief overview through a PowerPoint on the report's findings. This particular report gives you a state fiscal overview. The current fiscal year 2014 marks the fourth consecutive annual increase in general fund spending and revenues. There are signs of fiscal distress since the recession, but they've subsided, and the fiscal environment for most states indicates continued stability but slow growth. Many states ended fiscal year 2013 with a budget surplus, in large part because revenues outpaced. In other words, they were higher than revenues projected. However, fiscal improvements over the last several years have not returned states to normal patterns of growth. In other words, growth is slower than what states experienced prior to the Great Recession. Now, if we look at general fund spending trends, what we see here, again, is the fourth consecutive year of budget growth, although the growth is below average. States have grown, their state budgets have grown about 4% per year, fiscal years 11 through 14, but growth for states in their budgets before the Great Recession, when you saw some significant declines, was actually an average about 5.5%. On this slide, we see that fiscal year 2014 spending is projected to increase by $26 billion over 2013. So in other words, you're seeing growth, but if you look at the green bar, that's the amount that state general fund spending would have to grow when adjusted for inflation. So when you adjust for inflation, state spending is still not where it was in total prior to the Great Recession. Now, if you look at the spending areas of where states are putting their new dollars, the increases are mostly in K through 12 and Medicaid, and there is somewhat of an increase in the university and higher education area. And the all other area, which includes just about everything from mental health to parks and recreations, has seen an increase in spending. So this means that states are restoring some of the budgets that they saw cut during the Great Recession. There were very minimal mid-year budget cuts so far for this fiscal year, which means a stability in state budgets since they're not going back and having to cut significantly as they did during the recession. Now let's look at general fund revenue trends and enacted tax changes. If you look at revenues, they're slightly increasing for this fiscal year 2014 over fiscal year 2013. But again, if you look at the green bar, that's the inflation-adjusted amount that state revenue would have to increase to be back to pre-recession levels. So states, when you adjust for inflation, have tax revenues not yet back to where they were prior to the recession. And if you look at states enacted net changes in tax and fees, you'll see that they're actually a net aggregate tax cut in 2014. Now, of course, states differ, but when you add it all up, you get to an aggregate tax cut since a number of states have cut their taxes. As you can see in prior years, you actually saw a net increase in state taxes. Now, if you look at fiscal year 2014 enacted revenue changes by the major taxes, you'll see that sales taxes had a net decrease, even though 9 states enacted increases in their sales taxes, but 14 states enacted decreases. The most significant tax decreases and tax cuts that you've seen in states is in the personal income taxes. 9 increased income taxes, but 13 actually cut income taxes. And then you'll see there are a host of other taxes like corporate income, cigarettes, motor fuels, and alcohol that saw some minor changes one way or the other across the country. Let's look at balances, which are basically budget reserves They're a combination of the ending balances of states as well as their rainy day funds. And if you look at state balance levels, they are recovering, which is a good thing. They tend to go up during good times, but during recessions, the rainy day funds are used and ending balances, which in effect are surpluses, tend to not occur. But the balance levels are pretty good right now, despite the fact that we've had a fairly modest recovery coming out of the recession. And if you look at the state balance levels as a percentage, states are rebuilding their reserves, but they haven't reached peak levels, which prior to the Great Recession were as high as over 11%, and as recently as last year were close to 10%. But as you can see, balances are expected to fall a bit for fiscal year 2014. Finally, let's finish up with a state fiscal outlook. As you can see, the trends are positive, with 43 states actually increasing their general fund budgets for fiscal year 2014. Signs of fiscal distress continue to subside, which is a good thing, but budgets still are below their historical averages. So significant uncertainty still remains, especially regarding the federal decisions and federal government actions. As you know, we had the federal shutdown, we have the sequester, and other things going on that make it very difficult for states to make determinations based on the federal situation. And finally, there's some concern over slower projected growth rates in the general fund tax revenues that are coming in for this fiscal year. But for the most part, we're seeing improvement, we're seeing growth, and tough challenges fiscally will continue for states since there's not enough money to go around, as this fiscal report shows, even despite some growth. Now please take a look at the NASBO.org website to download the full report or look at the summary. You can examine state-by-state figures there and compare states. Thank you for taking a look at our summary of the Fiscal Survey of the States released December 2013.